So welcome to Wetlands and Wildlife, why you'll love our new Prospective reserves. I'm so glad that you are able to join us and learn all about these. This is a really wonderful free webinar with our restoration specialist, Mary Gartshore. We're so happy to be here and to tell you all about some of this incredible land in Norfolk County. So a little bit of a background about the organization. We are the Point Basin Land Trust. So we're a charitable non-government organization established in 1996. It's our 25th anniversary this year, which is very exciting. Our mission is to protect and restore functioning ecosystems across the Point Basin, which, as you can see here, is an area located in the central Carolinian region of southern Ontario. So we do this in a lot of different ways. We do it through land securement, land stewardship, recovery of species at risk, and those types of things. And so we do that on properties owned by us, the Land Trust, as well as properties owned by us and other partners and private landowners as well. So yeah, and in addition to all of that work, we also do various outreach and education projects to promote the good stewardship of these natural areas and protection of local biodiversity, and engage the public in other ways, which is part of the reason why we're here today. So a little bit about the nature reserves that we manage. We are lucky enough to, own and steward 10 nature reserve properties. These are all at the moment in Norfolk County. So, our activities are mostly focused on protecting these natural systems and these natural habitats. So things like watersheds, priority habitats like wetlands, oak savannas, Carolinian forests, those types of things. All of our properties are stewarded, which is kind of another word for managed, for their conservation values. So we're not trying to make money off of them. We're not trying to create a source of revenue from the lands themselves. Our goal is to preserve and conserve these properties for forever, in perpetuity. So our properties are open to the public, and many of them have a trail system as well. So if any of you are interested in visiting some of the trails, you can visit our website, which is longpointlandtrust.ca, and you can learn a little bit more about the properties that have trails and what you might be able to look at and see on some of them too. And then the reason why we're here today is to talk about two new potential properties that are really exciting. We are right now in April of 2021 in our very last stretch of trying to raise funds to actually help to create these two brand new nature reserves. And if you're interested in that, you're interested in donating, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but you can go to our website again, and specifically longpointlandtrust.ca/donate25. And you can learn a little bit more and to donate there if you're interested in helping to join us with this. But we're here today to specifically talk about these lands, why they're so special, why they deserve to be protected, and why we care about them and why you should care about them too. So to help with that, we have with us Mary Gartshore, and she's this incredible restoration specialist and naturalist biologist who's done so much work. So Mary, why don't you take it away and give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself, and then we can talk about these properties.
Okay. Well, I grew up on a farm in the Dundas Valley, and we had every form of livestock you could have, including horses. Yes, I've learned to ride horses, and I've learned how to be bucked off too. I went to University of Guelph in 1969 for the summer program, and graduated from Guelph, and then worked in Parks Canada on a number of occasions. But growing up in the Dundas Valley, I knew all the adjacent lands and all the salamander ponds and areas that I could visit as long as I was home for dinner. After Guelph, I spent a lot of time in other parts of the world, in Nigeria, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Australia, New Zealand, Western Canada. So lots of different places and lots of fun activities. I have actually personally been charged by African buffalo, one, African savanna elephant, and lowland gorilla. Very exciting at the time, kind of nice to think back on, since I survived it and could climb trees really quickly. And in 1990, bought a farm in Norfolk County and began doing ecological restoration projects starting in 1992, but also growing native plants. About 500 species we tried and worked with my partner, Peter Carson. And today, sort of semi-retired, but still doing contract work and advising on restoration. That's the short story. Next. So today we're going to look at 2 reserves that we are about to acquire. And one is close to St. Williams. And actually, before I start, I have to say, after wandering around in both of these prospective reserves, I found it really, these reserves are amazing, these potential reserves. They are undisturbed, old growth, lots of really neat plants and animals. And it's very obvious that the owners have loved these forests, have loved these properties, and generations, in one case, have looked after the forest. So it's really great to be able to take that legacy and actually have it last long into the future. Next. So this is the Sand Dune Ridge and Forest property. I would say about 1/3 of it is sand dunes. Some of them have been restored by the owners, and the other parts are forested. And the forest on the southern portion of this is really quite special Carolinian forest. The adjacent forests, it has adjacent forests on all sides, and through those is connected to St. Williams Conservation Reserve, which has high biodiversity as well. So it's well positioned to be a nature reserve. Next. So this is partially restored black oak sand barrens, black oak savanna on this property. And it is likely to have some of the species that occur in St. Williams Conservation Reserve. And it is possible to also expand this into all of the sand areas that this dune ridge covers. The dune ridge is actually was actually created during the melting of the glaciers about 13,000 years ago, and was probably an old shoreline of Lake Whittlesea and Lake Warren. The sand dunes are created by areas close to water, and it takes wind, water, and sand to create a sand dune like this. Next. So this is on top of the sand dune. It's an edge of black oak, and probably some white oak there. And it is part of the seed source for the sand dune. So these sand dunes actually are quite high and quite spectacular. So it'll be interesting to see how they perform. Next. So some species that occur at St. Williams Conservation Reserve, which is nearby, include, from top left, clockwise, Davis's shieldback, which is a a rare katydid that's only found in Norfolk County in Canada. It's flightless. It can only move into other areas by walking. It's fairly common and sings very early in the season. It's one of the first katydids to sing in the beginning of July. The beetle to the right of it is ghost tiger beetle, fairly uncommon to rare beetle that occurs on open sand dunes. And because it can fly, it can arrive on sand dunes when it finds the right conditions. It's currently at St. William's Conservation Reserve. The moth below it is called a fawn sallow. It is a very early spring moth that comes out and is quite numerous actually in oak savanna habitats, but not elsewhere, and is actually a rare moth in Ontario. The plant on the left lower corner is hoary puccoon, and it is a sand prairie species that's actually, and sand barren species. It occurs in St. William's. It's disappeared from a lot of habitats, and the owners have reintroduced it to this sand dune, and it's doing well. Next. So in Norfolk County, when you have a sand dune ridge running east-west, quite often you have a wetland and a moist deciduous forest below the sand dune. So this is the case here. It's a Carolinian forest with American chestnut, tulip tree, eastern flowering dogwood, species like shagbark hickory, and there are a few butternut, not healthy butternut, but they're there, and other interesting species. The flower is turtlehead, which flowers in September and is a food plant for Baltimore butterfly. The butterfly also feeds on a non-native relative of turtlehead called English plantain, which most of you will have in your garden. It's surprising the butterfly can go to that species as well. Next. So in this moist deciduous forest, the trees are very tall. This is a white oak, and this white oak is 70 to 100 feet high and has no branches on the first 50 feet, which suggests it is old growth. It may not have a diameter as large as an open grown tree, but it is very tall, and this is characteristic of old growth forests. My guess is it's probably 100 to 125 years at least of age. Next. This was a nice surprise. This is a leatherwood, and leatherwood is an infrequent shrub in natural forest, often next to beach, and it's in flower in early to mid-April and is leafing out already at this time. It is, like many early flowers, is important for pollinators, and it is it's special to have it. It's also not a species that is grown in horticulture. Next. So with this is the close-up view of leatherwood, if you're lucky enough to have it in in properties you know nearby. Flowers now, or it's almost finished flowering, and produces a fruit around the 1st of June. So I'm letting you know some of my restoration secrets here. Next. Underneath these trees is mats or carpets of spring ephemerals, including trout lily, spring beauty, and skunk cabbage. And this mat of wildflowers, a solid mat of wildflowers, tells you that there's very little disturbance in this forest. Furthermore, as these flowers finish, produce seed in the bright sunlight of early spring, they will die back and contribute their nutrients to the trees that are leafing out and growing. So there's a big food source for trees. And you can understand why this happens, because these plants rely on the trees and their leaves, the duff layer, to live on. And it is in their own best interest to do what the trees need. Next. So this is another wildflower that you can find in more wet habitats, and it's called Bulbus Bittercress. And it is a member of the mustard family, but a well-behaved member and native plant in the forest, and really important for pollinators, as mustard plants are. Next. Some of the wetlands next to the sand dunes, but in this deciduous Carolinian forest. In the foreground, you can see a couple of dead ash have fallen down. There's not a lot of dead ash throughout this forest, and most of them have now fallen. It's unfortunate because at least one of the species was quite rare in Ontario, and that's pumpkin ash. Only fairly recently, 20 years ago, discovered in Norfolk County and the rest of southwestern Ontario. The emerald ash borer that has killed these trees comes from Eastern Asia, probably came in on packing crates. It shows kind of how globalization becomes a problem. And most of the ash trees will probably die, but they've left lots of seed in the ground, and we may see resilience building in this species. The background is a spice bush, that yellow haze. And this is a member of the laurel family. We only have two woody plants that are in the laurel family, that's spice bush and sassafras in southern Ontario. You'll notice also some skunk cabbage. Actually, when the sassafras produces fruit, which is in September and October, that is great food for migratory birds. They're high in fat and, well, tasty to birds, I guess. And thrushes and robins and other species feed on these berries. Next. So this is another part of the forest, wetlands that have vernal pools that have a good diversity of vernal pool species. These four trees are swamp maple, and swamp maple is a towering wetland species that is a hybrid between red maple and silver maple. It gets its height and beauty from red maple, not from silver maple. Silver maple is an imported species from the southern states and tends to be much more spreading, but is often planted along streets in southern Ontario. But there's still some ongoing discussion about whether it actually occurs in nature in southern Ontario. Next. So in these ephemeral or vernal pools, spring pools, on one day of the year, Jefferson salamander arrives during a rainy day, or sorry, after a rainy day, during a rainy night to these pools. And Jeffersons have an interesting genetics. It's likely Jefferson salamander and blue-spotted salamander were separate populations before glaciation, which was 100,000 years ago. And when the glaciers melted 13,000 years ago, it is likely these two populations actually ran into one another and formed a triploid hybrid of all female salamanders called unisexual salamanders. And these salamanders cannot be distinguished from female Jefferson salamanders easily. The only way to check is to test the karyotype, 3 sets of chromosomes rather than 2, and the genetics to see if they're pure Jefferson salamander or actually one of these unisexual salamanders. So you can take a little piece off the end of the tail, grows back. Salamanders can grow almost everything back, and test it in the lab. So these salamanders, these unisexual salamanders have a dark side. They come to the pools to lay their eggs, but first they acquire pure Jefferson salamander spermatophores because they require the sperm from the male to cause their eggs to start to develop. But then they slough off that the genome of the male, and all the eggs are identical to the female. And also these, they may compete with pure Jefferson for those spermatophores. Now you can always tell a male because they have a swollen base to the tail, and Jefferson, like salamanders with a swollen base to the tail, will either be a pure blue spotted, which is small with bright blue spots, or a pure Jefferson, which looks like this. Next. So this is a close-up. This animal wasn't disturbed. It was walking to the pond, and I just snapped a photo. And in the pond, in the sand dune ridge forest property, we found egg masses of this salamander. So we can't tell for sure whether it's a Jefferson, but pure Jeffersons usually have all good eggs in them, which this does. So there are Jeffersons around. Now, 364 days of the year, this salamander is terrestrial. One day, it's aquatic to lay its eggs. And as a juvenile or as a tadpole, it's aquatic and then comes out about mid-July as a very small juvenile that looks like an adult. Next. So this is a pine stand of red pine, and pines are often planted in fields so they can be transitioned into native forest once they've matured. And in this case, it's on a sand dune, so there's the possibility of expanding the oak barrens, oak savanna, oak habitats in this area. Next. We're moving on now to the Hemlock Slough forest. And this is a slightly larger forest and occurs between Port Dover and Nanticoke. Next. So this is the location of this slough forest, and it does have connections with other forests in the area and has actually been identified by the Carolinian Canada Big Picture project as an important core area north from this site. So there are other properties which are similar But actually, during the natural areas inventory, when we took a quick look at this property, we discovered late in the process back in 1986 that we only had 4 hemlock slough forests that were in really good condition in this area. Next. So just to take the vegetation cover off with an example from an adjacent agricultural field, you'll see that this heavy clay soil of the Haldeman clay plain has many low areas which fill with water and humus and have a characteristic slough forest. Often open water as well. So the sloughs are the open water. They are not necessarily connected to one another, as in this example where there's drainage ditches between them. So, and in this slough forest, to me, every slough has a different composition of vegetation and probably also the fauna, especially vernal pool fauna. Next. So this is the part of the forest, upland, well, it's not really upland, it's moist forest dominated by hemlocks and has a very northern sort of character to it. Lots of white birch trees, almost no yellow birch, and lots of plants that you might find farther north. But you can see that it's right adjacent to a wetland. You can see the light coming through. This is 25th of May, 2017. And so these sloughs are contributing edge as well as wetlands for biodiversity. Next. So the commonest plant or shrub throughout this forest is Canada Fly Honeysuckle. And it, like leatherwood, flowers at this time of year, is good for pollinators. Its fruit ripens around the 1st of July, and these are eaten by birds as well. Just a thought about birds. Songbirds nesting in a forest mostly eat caterpillars and feed their young caterpillars. But when there's fruit available to them around the beginning of July, which is well planned out by the plants, because songbirds are seed dispersers for these plants, they're kind of between broods. That is, they've raised their first batch and those are still begging for food, and the second batch is a nest on its way. So it's nice for them to have this candy all spread through the forest to give them a little bit of a lift. So these are sweet fruits. Service berry is another one. Red mulberry, where it occurs. Also, red elderberry is around the 1st of July. So there is a purpose that these plants have. Next. So this is one of the wetlands. And the amazing thing about these little ponds in this forest is each one is slightly different or a lot different. And this is surrounded by sphagnum hummocks, but the shrubs that are growing in this are more southern, like high bush blueberry. There's also in the foreground, there is a swamp loosestrife. There's chokeberry, which has fruit sort of in August. Also winterberry holly, and probably several other species of more or less southern species in this wetland. Wetlands like this are almost perfect for four-toed salamander, and the female four-toed salamanders make nests in May in the sphagnum moss. They incubate in a way, not temperature-wise, but they circle the eggs. They prevent predators from eating the eggs, and they also prevent bacterial or fungal infections. And then the little tadpoles hatch, and they just kind of wiggle around and drop into the water, and then mom's job is over. Next. So not all of the wetlands are in sunlight. So this is one that's shaded by hemlock. Still has lots of ferns and interesting plants in the wetlands, and lots of sphagnum moss. So there's different habitats in the more shady wetlands. Also in the background, you'll see a tip-up mound from a hemlock that's fallen over. And underneath that root mass wall, there will be nests, possible nests of Louisiana water thrush or northern water thrush. Certainly northern water thrush lives in this woodland during the summer. Also quite a few wood thrushes, but we expect to find more species. Next. And another wetland and another suite of plants. So a completely different group of plants. This is more open, so it has calla, white calla lilies in it, as well as cinnamon fern. And some of these actually have royal fern as well as interrupted fern. So it just depends on the amount of lighting, the size, the nutrients, and what the overstory is like. But you can see that the sunlight gets to the pond, and the leaves are already out, so we know that there's a lot of sunlight getting to the pond throughout the summer. And some of these may dry down a bit, but if you have calla, you probably have moist soil year round. Next. So we were lucky enough to find eggs of spotted salamander. This salamander is much more common than Jefferson salamander across southern Ontario and up into parts of northern Ontario. This species doesn't have any hybrid issues. It doesn't have anybody stealing its spermatophores. So it can be quite common, and they have some interesting behavior. Next. So these salamander males gather and produce spermatophores, and you can tell they're males because the base of their tail is swollen. And they seem to form these groups and deposit a lot of spermatophores on the leaves. And also some of the males sort of pretend they're females and deposit, they get behind a male and pretend they're a female. The male in front deposits a spermatophore, and the male behind deposits his spermatophore on top. Now, this is, they're very competitive. So this is what they're doing. They're having a little dance here. And I just had a cell phone and had a small flashlight. I didn't want to disturb them, and I just kind of stood beside them in rubber boots, hip waders actually, because usually rubber boots, when the water goes in your rubber boots, that's where the salamanders breed. So you wear hip waders and don't disturb anything. They don't really care anyway. They have something else on their mind, and they create these patches of spermatophores. And when they're finished, we'll go to the next. They're breathing air. That's what the one going by was doing. They have to breathe air. They're only here for one night of the year, and if you kept them in an aquarium, they would die. They would drown. So the next night, come back, and the females are all laying eggs, having had lots of choice of spermatophores to pick up. Apparently they pick up about 5, and some of those may be the result of 2 salamanders depositing a spermatophore. So the expectation of both the males and the females is that they will have many opportunities to produce the next generation. These eggs are laid, they're gelatinous and hygroscopic. So once they're laid, the ball of gelatinous material expands to be about the size of a baseball. And there's about 100 or 200 eggs in each of these masses. The gelatin is quite dense, you'll see in a minute. And there's some speculation that the salamanders want to lay all in the same place in order to create solar collectors with these masses of gel. And that allows the eggs to be warmer than the surrounding environment, develop quicker, and hatch or emerge earlier, which means that predators aren't going to get the eggs. I mean, they're sitting ducks, those eggs, and you'll see newts drill a hole with their head right into the middle of these egg masses and eat all the eggs. That's another salamander, but salamander without, that's more widespread. Next. So this is a yellow-spotted salamander egg mass. It's been in the water for about 3 weeks in the Hemlock Slough forest. And you can see that those little round eggs are now tadpoles beginning to develop. And they usually emerge from these egg masses before May. And they spend the whole summer feeding on invertebrates and probably some vegetation as well in the pond, and they emerge probably around mid-July, which is when they're just little yellow-spotted salamanders, about 2 inches long, maybe 1 inch long. But next. So the forest floor in this Hemlock Slough forest has some northern character to it. And you can see here bunchberry, which you find farther north, starflower with the pointed leaves, and some mayflower. Lots of mosses and club mosses are also on the forest floor. So this is the northern element of this forest. Next. On the 4th of February, there'd been a couple of snowfalls, and I wanted to see how much mammal activity was happening in the forest, and you can see the tracks in the snow. Every mammal that doesn't hibernate and could be there, the tracks were there, from deer to coyotes, foxes, raccoons, opossums, etc. But also lots of small mammal tracks. And these are the tracks of common shrew and smoky shrew. And those 2 small shrews are active 365 days of the year, 24/7. They just live 1 year, but obviously there are lots of small mammals this year. High productivity, the result is small mammals. What's interesting, both the shrews and the salamanders, and the shrews don't touch salamanders, they have toxic skin, are detritus feeder predators. So those animals, like the introduced earthworms and introduced slugs, are feeding on the duff layer in the forest and reducing its volume and increasing nitrogen, which can allow things like garlic mustard to get in. And what these little guys do is they eat a lot of insects, arthropods. Salamanders will eat earthworms. I'm not sure these guys eat earthworms, but frogs do. And we assume there's lots of frogs there. So these are the decomposer predators. And there is some concern among scientists that decomposer predators are declining, and that's why we're losing that 6-inch duff layer that's in the forest floor that keeps the forest insulated and moist. Next. So in the more deciduous part of the forest, there's shagbark hickory, white oak, red oak, swamp white oak, bur oak, and even black oak, which is a surprise, but it's Norfolk County. And the forest floor here, similar to the other property, has a good selection of spring ephemerals, and the whole forest floor is solid with spring ephemerals. And again, this is the health of the forest, the leaf duff layer. A lot of these species really rely on that duff layer to survive and reproduce. These will die when the leaves of the trees come out, and then those nutrients go to the trees. And that helps the survival of the trees, but also of the ground layer of flora. Again, think about pollinators. Pollinators do visit these plants. If you don't mind ticks, you can crawl around on your hands and knees and photograph them coming to the flowers. But so these are really important plants for the ecological integrity of these forests. Next. So although we call it a hemlock slough forest, when you actually take a close look, you'll find there's lots of very large red oak. So there's 8 large red oak in this photograph. They form a canopy above the hemlock, and the leaf litter underneath them is all oak. There's hardly any hemlock needles, and they are forming part of the canopy. Next. So when you look up at the sky, these are the canopies of the red oaks above the hemlocks, and there are some tall hemlocks as well. And the importance of these oak trees is oaks are known to be the most important plant species to support moths and caterpillars. So caterpillars support songbirds, and songbirds take that energy and fly south to the tropics. By the way, songbirds in North America that fly to the tropics are most important probably for seed dispersal and pollination of trees in the tropics. You see trees full of orioles pollinating or feeding on nectar on trees and eating fruit. But in North America, where they're breeding, they're feeding on caterpillars, and oaks are the best caterpillar producer. Next. Last but not least, there are a few old, large white pines that tower above even the red oaks. And this is one, and these are probably over 125 years of age. They haven't been planted, they are local stock, and these trees are very important trees for our future for restoration, because these are what is on the landscape now and has been here for the last 13,000 years. Next. And we've come to the end of
we have
the talk.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for that. That was really incredible. You really were able to tell us and show us such a great amount of information about those 2 properties, what makes them so special, and why they really need our protection. So as you watch this, we hope that you were inspired to join us in helping to create these 2 nature reserves. We would really, really, really love it if you could help us. The easiest way to do that is to go to our website, longpointlandtrust.ca/donate25. If you'd like to send in a check or talk about some of the other options you can do for donation as well, don't hesitate to send us an email, and I will drop that in the description below as well. And so you can send us an email, general@longpointlandtrust.ca. You can see our contact information on the website as well. You can also give us a phone call. We're more than happy to chat about all of these things, because really we just want to create these nature reserves and protect them. And you can clearly see why. Mary did such a great job of explaining that. So a few questions that we've been asked, Mary, for you, if you can help us answer them. What would you say are the acidity levels of some of the wetlands at some of these different properties?
The wetlands, obviously we walked in a bit to find the eggs of spotted salamander. You certainly stick in the clay below in some of the wetlands. There's a lot of leaves and dead leaves and moss and branches in these wetlands, and that adds to the acidity. But most of the Haldeman clay plain and sand plain, I believe, are calcareous. So the surface will be acidic, and below the surface may still be calcareous. And the oak leaves, which you can see, I mean, this is a hemlock slough forest, but the leaves on the ground are all oak leaves. So they also contribute acidity to the landscape.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit, I know you mentioned a little bit about some of the various songbirds and migratory birds. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the other species you've already seen or you're expecting to find on some of these properties?
Well, certainly it's a really birdy place year round. I mean, I was in there on February 4th and it looked cold and everything, and there was chickadees and brown creepers and a great horned owl. I guess the great horned owl had discovered the small mammals too. So there's lots going on in this forest. In the summer, in 1986, we had winter wren nesting, Canada warbler, which are no longer common species in southern Ontario, and certainly Canada warbler is actually considered a species of, I think, well, it's a species at risk. So we're hoping that some of those species are still using this forest. During migration, it's a real attraction to birds coming across the lake. Vernal pools themselves have lots of arthropods and invertebrates that are really interesting. And if we explore those, we may find some new crayfish, maybe. Chimney crayfish. There's certainly chimney crayfish there, but we don't know which ones yet. And other things, dragonflies. So this is kind of, you know, could have anything in it. So we're really looking forward to this.
Absolutely, I can definitely tell that. Now, and I know you've mentioned as well that you've found some pretty cool mushrooms there too, which are often good signs of healthy ecosystems. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe one of these properties is with even just a couple kilometers of the Lake Erie shoreline, so really important for migratory birds. Is that correct?
This would be I'm not sure exactly how many kilometers, but it's very close to the shore, and it would be the first thing that songbirds flying across Lake Erie, unless they landed on Long Point, which is a mistake, because there's not a lot of food there and it's kind of cold. So they really want to come inland. And if they see that, that would be the place they would land first on their crossing Lake Erie early in the morning. And that's about to happen. I mean, that happens like, there's only 4 days of the year that there's huge amounts of tropical birds migrating, neotropical birds migrating into our area, and that's about to happen. Usually around May 6th, we start to get this push. So this is a place where you probably would be good to do some birding.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. Wow. Well, that's really great to know. We're, like I said, this is this last push to try to, we're trying to close on these properties by the end of April. So, I think it's well within next year, hopefully by next May, maybe we would be able to do some birding tours, or to show some donors some really exciting places to see some of these migratory birds as they're coming along. Great. Well, thank you again, Mary, so much for coming and talking to us all about these incredible properties. Thank you, the viewer, for coming and joining us and learning about them too. And if you want to join us in helping to protect and preserve and this incredible natural legacy that these properties have, we invite you to join us. You can donate again online, longpointlandtrust.ca/donate25, or if you go to our website, you can see a place where you can mail in a check, or you can feel free to send us an email or give us a call if you have any questions about other ways to donate. So great. Well, thank you all again for coming. Thanks, Mary. And
thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.